So what is control rig? Control rig is Epic's procedural control rigging network, and rig on its own is a control system that is used to animate a character. And so let's just jump right into the Unreal. So with pretty much any default starting mannequin, you're going to have a rigged mannequin already. And if you place it on a level, you're going to get all the controls plus the sequencer to animate it. In terms of the controls, we have two types of controls usually, and this applies to pretty much any software, including Unreal. So we have controls that are named IK controls, which is IK stands for inverse kinematics. So that basically works by selecting say this foot control, and that automatically readjusts the entire leg, the knee position, the hip. And the other type of controls is FK control. So FK control is just forward kinematics. So you just press each control and you position the mannequin the way you want. So that's primarily how all the rigs are. They either have FK or IK switches sometimes, and you can control through that and animate. And you basically set up keys based on those controls positions. Now, where is it basically used and how it is used? The rigs as a control system can be used for, let's jump into some examples here. You can say animate, for example, the destruction of a car just using those controls. Same way is pretty much all the MetaHumans. That is, all of that is just the rig. Okay. So control rig in Unreal features multiple things, starting with procedural animations. So for that, we have some of the rigs that are supplied in Marketplace. So for example, this Mac has some procedural controls which allows to adjust its legs positions, and you can also control its tower. Then we have something called Proxy, which is just one controller that allows us to do allows us to control multiple controls just with this one. Same proxy controller is actually can be found, for example, on the fingers here. So that basically just controls multiple controllers that is assigned to this proxy. Then we have something called dynamic hierarchy, which is like very awesome feature that Unreal introduced. And the best example for that is this cube right here. So what it does basically, it automatically readjusts the hierarchy of those controls, which allows you to create those very complex things very easily inside Unreal. Because if you try to create this type of cube puzzle, say in Maya or in Houdini, that you're going to have a lot of problem with that, because this software doesn't support dynamic hierarchy. Then we have function libraries, and that is basically, well, obviously it's a way to optimize this entire network view so it doesn't look too complex, but it also creates a library that can be reused throughout the project or any other projects. There is a standard library that is supplied with this entire control rig, and we can also create our own stuff and then reuse it in different rigs throughout multiple projects. Next, we have Modular rig, which is another awesome feature which comes with 5.4. So let me close that and jump to meshes, I believe. So if I select the skeletal mesh, right-click on it, and I believe it's create, and there is control rig and there is modular rig. So I need modular rig. This is basically a way to, if I double click this is basically a way to rig the character without going into this entire heavy network in figuring out all those functions. It's pretty straightforward for the humanoid characters. So, for example, here the root control is already here, and if we find I believe it's spine here. That's going to already generate all the necessary controls for the spine. Same with the legs and arms. So leg, and we have the key control for the leg. The same way, pretty much, you can set up all the main controls, including the fingers, and then save it and just drag and drop it inside the viewport and animate it from there. So that kind of like speeds up a lot of things. And I believe later on, with those functions that I was talking about, we will be able to add additional auto rig functions in here as well. Say, for example, we have some kind of like wing, a character that has wings. Yeah, and that is not kind of like a standard rig. But if we create a function for that later on, we will be able to use it just like that without recreating it in here. So that's that. Now, a little bit about how the control rig is organized on its own. So if we just go inside of here, we have a construction event. And again, this is, for those of you who is familiar with blueprints, that's pretty much, all of this is blueprints, just you have different functions for the rigging purposes. So we have construction event, and this construction event is basically creates positions of all the controls. So if I disconnect this, so this just creates the controls that's supposed to be placed and generated. They are not right now attached to anything. And then once you place the controls, later on you set up the actual logic of how those controls are going to deform the mesh and what type of part of the mesh they're going to move. So that's pretty much how all the control rigs are looking. Additionally, you will have here events for interaction. We'll talk about it a bit later, but that's where everything happens pretty much. And now the most important question, how to use the control rig. And we have multiple ways of implementing the control rig. So the first one is the sequencer. So in the same way, I dropped those characters in here and animated them. The cool thing about it is that if I move this over here, the sequencer can be saved as a separate file here. And if the proper mesh that was assigned to a sequencer exists in the level, you can just open it And that basically will give you access to the entire animation. And if I play this, that's again the entire animation plus all the keys that I set up here. So if we need to change something, that's easily done. And once we've changed it, we can go up there and basically bake animation as sequence. And that will generate just the animation file that later on can be piped into whatever logic we have. Similar to this way, second, and switch. There is this quick animation that I also did for Lexo, where we have a character that just exiting the car. So again, this is entirely done just in Unreal alone. Next up, we have animation blueprint, and this is a way how you start setting up the gameplay logic. So for example, just to illustrate how this works. So this character right now that I've created can pick up a weapon and can use the animation that I've set up here to get the weapon. He can also pick up another weapon, which is a gun, and also play those animations. And depending on the type of the weapon assigned, the animation sequences are changing. So all of this is done in here. So there is animation sequence that's displaying for each of the gun. There are additional variables that I've created and controlling inside blueprints to determine when play any specific sequence. And this is how it's all blended together. Also, in the animation blueprint, there is event graph, in which you can directly reference whatever events you've created inside of the blueprints, and again assign it to the variable which is later on used in here. So that's kind of like the primal way how you create all the gameplay logic. It's just different animation clips that you can combine in various ways. You can control how they are blended based on what rules they blended, even based on which bones they are assigned to. For example, if I have a head movement as a separate animation file, and that head movement only affects the neck joints, I can easily combine it with, say, the character running, because I can just tell through this node to assign it to the neck alone, and that will blend it all together. And the third way, which is I'm currently digging into, control rig component. This is specifically blueprint component that you can play with inside the blueprints. You have access to all the controls from the rig. Say, for example, we have this mech, right? And maybe you want to assign this control, the position of this control, to the camera. And you can do that with the control rig component blueprint. And through that, you basically create procedural animation based on inputs or any other logic that you want to have. Yeah, that's primarily it. That's the control rig.
Great. That was some really good digging. The
Yeah.
Lexo animations turned out
Nice.
wonderful as well, and the fact that you did that all in the control rig, it's cool. So I have 3 questions. If you can answer those for me. So with control rig for procedural animation at the when you showed the Mac, you had the control that the turret was following. And just to clarify here, the controls are added separate of the rig and the controls influence the rig? Is that the way it works?
So the whole thing, right? The whole thing consists of two components. You have the skeleton, the bones,
Yep.
which is basically locators or nulls that are assigned to specific clusters of geometry,
Yes, and then the
and
rig
you through
to animate it.
skin weights.
Hmm.
Yeah, you basically animate those controls.
And so the
And
question with the controls is, are they considered part of the rig, or are they something separate of the rig that influences the rig?
the controls and the logic that you have on the controls, those are the rig.
Okay, so that's all
This
clear.
entire system.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
My understanding is that you, you've got like the rig, which is uh, this would be considered it's literally called a control rig in the industry. That's why they've called it this. Like where in games where they would, like, for example, animate a face, right? You wouldn't have the animator going in and manipulating the
And keyframing
bones.
everything, yep.
Well, no, yeah, no, well, they wouldn't be manipulating the bones directly. They would be manipulating the control rig for the face. And a good example of this is that when people export data for a game, sometimes they'll find like a face which has 150 bones in it, and they're just like, well, no wonder the game took so long. You've got this crazy all these bones inside the face. And it's because those were all like in like implementation detail bones, and nobody was ever actually animating those bones. They were always animating the control rig on top of those bones.
Right. And so my naive view of the controls themselves is they were sort of like, well, I don't think it's an exact parallel to like a solver, but it was something manipulating the rig. Yeah.
The solver would be the IK. They're actually called solver. So IK, inverse kinematics,
Yep.
which is basically the logic that you assign to all the controls.
Yep.
This is the solver.
Okay. So that brings me into my next question then. I don't know if you remember, we had at some point looked at returnal visual effects breakdown. So,
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah, I think you might remember, and I'm going to give you this.
Here we can see
and ask you to just put it on your screen, Kirill, since I'm recording your screen. But what I want to do, yes, here we go. Okay. I'm going to pass you this video. If you can open it. It's got the time code already. So I thought with control rig, and you had talked about, this leads into my second question, was about the dynamic hierarchy. And you showed the example of the Tetris, of the Rubik's Cube, but I was wondering, is this something the dynamic hierarchy relates to, where you have some parent and things can sort of automatically be nested underneath that? It does some magic automatically to...
So static hierarchy is basically what we see right now on the screen. So you have exact definition of parent-child relationship. Each following bone is the child of the previous bone. And this hierarchy doesn't change. You don't reassign the connections between those bones. Dynamic hierarchy is when, say, you have this initial bone here as a root, and this last bone is the child, and you can, like, for example, flip it. This bone becomes the root, and this one becomes the child. And because of that, all the logic of how this entire chain behaves changes.
So there are potentially two valuable uses of that. One is just for easier editing, that you can move things around and it will naturally not care so much. You won't have to manually redo the entire hierarchy as you would static in a static hierarchy. And then the second thing is, can this change at runtime as well in play? Or does this say in editor?
I think this is a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The way how this is set up, it changes at runtime, but this is like the rig logic specifically, and you make it, for example, if you have, for example, again, this puzzle cube that you need to rig animating, for example, those controls, right? You can expose them in Blueprint.
So I see why this is such a good example now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and later on you might have a quest in the game, and the player can just have to make this cube whole again as a quest, for example.
And with this particular example, I'm not sure how you would even do this without the dynamic
hierarchy.
Yeah.
rigging.
Yeah, I'm seeing why this is such a good example of that. Yeah.
Like it's literally impossible without it. So
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Kirill, what do you think?
It's impossible. Like right now, if you want to do the same thing in Maya, Blender, or Houdini, you will kill yourself trying to do that, because that's going to be like really hard.
Static hierarchy of all the permutations of the
or something
like that
Yeah.
that it could be in and swap.
You pretty much will have to write your own solver if you want it to be performant and quick and easy, and not create problems for animator, because again, animators usually they don't even know all the stuff. They just want to have the most simplistic controls that they can just select and do. Yeah.
So my third question.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, like you could see, like the Rubik's cube is a reasonably abstract example, because
so something that comes to mind is, let's say I'm thinking like if this was comboed with a destruction system, and I could see this coming into play where the dynamic hierarchy, you would have an object which might have a particular hierarchy until it is destroyed in some part, and all of a sudden, like let's take I don't know, a weapon or a blade, and there's a set of durability, and after X durability, it then breaks, or it something happens to it which changes the hierarchy of where the tip is.
Yeah.
For example, like all of a sudden you have a spear, but the spear point breaks, and now the butt side, you're slapping people with that for blunt damage now because your spear tip broke off and there's no more piercing damage.
Yeah, and it can be procedural.
Yeah.
For example, one of the things, right, for this car from the Matrix example, right, they have a combination. They have a combination of all those bones that you can select to deform the car, the vehicle, and they also have some procedural physics on top of it, which is using that is baked inside the animation blueprint.
Okay.
And that's how they have very realistic, because if you look at this video, this guy is basically hitting things, and you get a very realistic damage happening here. So for example, you see the bumper just broke off. So this, I guess this is also the dynamic hierarchy. It's just lost the connection. It's no longer parented for whatever joint it's here. And it's very easy, because otherwise you will have to actually animate this as the entire clip, and it will have a bug in all the previous versions in the static hierarchy, because this thing can just stuck somewhere, and it's just going to create lots of problems.
Right.
But with dynamic hierarchy, you can just drop the connection to this bone, and it basically disappeared.
Yeah. Okay. And then my third question is on the modular rig. So I was wondering, in the modular rig, if you can open that up, the example that you had. Yes.
Mm.
So the question here was, is a requirement of the modular rig that you have to have the same skeleton to be modular, or is there some flexibility baked into the system?
Speaking of, technically speaking, you can use, for example, the span control, or there is a chain. There is the chain control here. So if you have a chain, like say a wire or a tail, or anything remotely that has a chain type of hierarchy, you can apply this, and it will work. It will set up the
Okay, so that's a
controllers.
bit of a kitchen sink asset then. Like if you
Pretty
have
much.
something that doesn't fit the skeleton exactly, the chain is.
It will adapt, but again, it can adapt only so far. For example,
So
yeah,
my
for
follow-up
example,
question
if
there is then, sorry to interrupt, I'm just running out of thought. So then, if I was to apply the chain on something where the skeleton didn't entirely fit, is it easy enough inside of the editor here to be able to move the control points around on this?
it's not as straightforward. For example,
Okay,
say
so
I
it is
have
like a separate asset. It's not just
it's
something that you would modify in here.
yeah, it's going to be a separate asset, because if you have a chicken leg, for example, right, you have like a different knee structure, you're going to have an additional bone here, and the IK solver expects only 2 bones. So usually for type of a chicken leg situation, you will assign 2 IK solvers on each part of the leg, and then you make them work together, and that's kind of like an entirely different story. So it won't work on everything. For something like that, you need to have like a different solver here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I was just curious on the level of flexibility. And does anyone have any other questions? I have one more, but I'm going to let someone else speak first.
I think.
So.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you have, for example, this character and you want to do the chicken leg, can you still use the pre-made assets for the arms, for example, and do manually the bones for the chicken leg?
Technically, use I think the finger, this one, because this is just simple FK, forward kinematics, which just like assigns control to each bone. So that technically would work, but again, usually with the legs, you want to have IK, because animating legs without IK, just doing FK bone by bone, setting key on each bone, that's going to be pain. It's really hard.
Or for example, if you have, let's say, instead of this mannequin, you have one like bender from Futurama. So you, for example, can add a key in the foot, but then a leg, no, tail, tail bones for the legs, for the rest of the leg. So you have like a cartoonish leg.
For cartoony characters, usually for the cartoony characters, they have stretch and squash type of system in the rigs, usually for those characters. And that's kind of like, again, separate solver. If your character looks bipedal, looks humanoid, and has the same amount of bones as it does for the epic mannequin, then it will work. But if it doesn't, that will require some custom solution.
I was thinking about like rubber hose, like legs and arms without a specific elbow or knee, just round, like a round
Technically, what you
hose.
can do, you can assign, say, if you want to have kind of like very plastic arm, very flexible arm, you can like have like 10 bones in this arm, and then assign just a chain solver, and that in that chain solver, which is again this one, it will have a function here which allows IK chain solver to be activated, and that will pretty much act the way you describe right now. So
Cool.
technically, again, you can play with that. You can kind of hack it, if you will, but it won't work for everything, and it might not produce the best result if it slightly deviates from this model. Usually for all those characters, custom characters, we would want to have additional solvers here created specifically.
Thanks.
And also, you worked on the cinematic, the sequencer also with all of the parts of the control rig. Then you said you would export that, but what do you export? What does it create? It's an
So what-
animation file that you.
Yeah, it does create a simple animation file. So again, once you've done animating it, you can
Yeah,
click
that's what you
on
use after. Yeah.
Yeah, so that will basically bake. You will select the folder, and it will export it. So it will export this time frame up to the red line here, and that will be just like a standard animation file that
Okay.
that we use.
And then do you typically chain them with some logic?
Yeah, this is animation blueprint.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the example of it being chained. So if you want.
Okay.
So again, here I select the rifle, and I have specific animations for the rifle, but then I select the gun, and now it
Yeah.
plays different animations for the gun. This entire logic inside this animation blueprint here, plus I have additional logic in blueprints to
Yeah. Okay.
control
Thanks.
specific variables.
Cool. Any other questions before we wrap up? Thank you, Kirill.
Should be good.
That was great. So I'll go ahead and get this recorded and shared, and then like the artist you are, I noticed instead of slides, you opted for Photoshop layers. So if you want to pass that along and
Yeah.
upload it when I upload a lightning talk, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll have it on video.